Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. My name is Tilly. This video is part 2 to my hip surgery compilation adventures, whatever you want to call it. Today I'm going to be talking about surgeries 2 and 3. If you want to hear about the first surgery, go check out that video over there. I spoke to my mom on the phone yesterday and she said that she has such a clear memory of me coming out of the first surgery and being like, oh, but that pinching pain, that static horrific pain is still there. And she said her heart just dropped and she was like, she didn't take it seriously because I literally just got out of the surgery, so I guess the pain never ever went. I had been doing physio for about a year at this point probably. I went to see the surgeon from my first video again after the surgery. You do this just as like a follow-up, and he ultimately said that that pinching pain was hormonal and that it would never go away. I went to him to address the pinching pain. That was the main concern, and still he said that it wouldn't go away. After this, obviously feeling very defeated, I went back to the osteopath who was the first person who told me that I had a hip impingement. He said, Hong Kong has obviously shown its hand with what's happening. Why don't we go look in Australia? Let's look at some doctors and professionals over there and see if they're able to help you. They're probably better equipped to deal with an athletic population and they might have seen what's been happening to you. So I was like, sure. So my osteo made me 3 appointments in Australia. He made me one with a sports medicine doctor and then with 2 different types of physios. I had to fly to Australia from Hong Kong for a university anyways, and so I was going down, and on my way to uni, we went to go see these doctors. The first one, the sports medicine guy, was all about pain management, and he essentially told me that when you've been in pain for a really long time, sometimes your body can just continue creating pain. All in all, he said it was in my head. Obviously left that feeling very disheartened, but we went to the next. We saw a woman who specialized in professional runners, and she said that I had very, very shallow hip joints. Kind of like a Goldilocks situation, to be honest. It was like, The person who I went to see who changed it all was this incredible physio. We walked in with my x-rays and with my complaints. Straight away, he sat us down and he was like, what do you think is the problem? So I just said, well, hip impingement is what I've been told, and based on like little bits of research that I've done, that seems to make the most sense to me. Within seconds of him looking at the x-ray, he said, you have hip retroversion. What that means is that my hip socket and a little bit of my femoral head, they're facing backwards. So there's just not as much space when it comes to that hip flexion as there would be in somebody who has a more neutral alignment of their hips. It took him about 2 seconds to spot something that 3 surgeons in Hong Kong couldn't spot. What the f? So this physio gave me some exercises. I mean, we felt pretty positive that maybe finally we were onto something, because this is a diagnosis that I hadn't heard before. I continued doing those exercises, not really having any success. This physio actually ended up coming to Hong Kong in the midst of all the protests and everything, because he was leading a conference for a bunch of different osteopaths and a bunch of different physios explaining his physio stuff. He sent us a text and he was like, look, why don't you come pop by at the end of the conference and then we can see how you're going and we can do another appointment and we'll tell you what's happening. So I show up at this place. The osteopath that I originally saw was there. The new physio from Australia was there, obviously, because he was leading the conference. And then there were about 4 to 5 other physios that just hung around for the appointment because they wanted to see my physio practice what they preached. So I had like 6 people look at me that day. The physio gave me some new exercises to do. I was in tears. I was really struggling doing them. Every time they would test my hip in that range of motion, between the 6 of them, I was in tears. I was very emotional. The conclusion was, this isn't going to be solved by physio exercises. This is a structural issue, something that needs to be addressed, most likely with an operation. And I mean, when very qualified people tell you that, and when there's like 6 of them telling you that, then you kind of tend to listen. I think one of the physios was like for the Matildas at that time, so that was pretty cool. And I remember him telling me at the end, after he was trying to get me to do all of the exercises, he was like, yeah, I don't know if you're ever going to be able to rotate or do sport. And I was like, so surgery was the answer. I booked in with a very conservative surgeon in Australia who this physio said he would be the person to go to. He's the hip guy. You go to him if you have any hip issues. I'm thinking if it's a conservative surgeon, that's awesome. That means it probably won't be a very invasive surgery and hopefully it'll be like one and done and I'll be out of there. That's kind of what I was going into it thinking, and to be honest, I probably set myself up for a bit of failure there. But this was a few months later. We're probably in about March of 2020 right now. So if any of you are thinking March 2020, why does that sound sound familiar? Yep, we went down like right at the start of COVID to Melbourne to see this very conservative surgeon. We walked into this surgeon's office, he performed his tests, he had an assistant surgeon there with him also looking to see what was going on in my hip. He said, I have to recommend 2 more surgeries, and after that, I cannot promise you that you're ever going to be able to run again. Obviously, he was better at managing expectations, but when you hear this at 20, I must have been at the time, it's not super promising. It's not a nice thing to hear. And I remember going outside, calling Callum, crying. Lots of crying in this story, but when you're in chronic pain for such a long amount of time and you've done literally everything, and then somebody's like, oh, and you also have this massive thing to go through, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get back to doing what you love. So that was frustrating. If this guy recommended 2, we booked in for 2 operations. We had to fly back to Hong Kong. COVID is kicking in across the world at this point. So my surgeries were booked for like July and August. So when we flew back to Australia the second time, we had to go through 2 weeks of quarantine before we could actually even have that first surgery. So we were in a hotel for 2 weeks. I mean, here's a photo. I remember thinking I looked so horrible and out of shape here, and it just kind of shows a dysphoric and depressed state I was in. That was a really, really difficult time, and it was frightening. I was so scared. I think I built up so much anxiety around the actual quarantine that I didn't even consider that I would actually have to do a surgery at the end of it. So 2 weeks of quarantine down, then I had my first surgery about the day after. The first surgery that I had was a hip arthroscopy, so the same as the first surgery that failed in Hong Kong. The hip arthroscopy would be to repair my labrum. They repaired the labrum by giving me a new one. So they took the hamstring tendon from somebody else and then they used that to create a new labrum for me. I don't know where they got that hamstring tendon from, and I didn't really want to ask. Before I went under in the actual procedure, you have like a little waiting room, and I remember asking the surgeon, just out of curiosity, not because I particularly mind scars all that much, but I asked him, would you go through the same arthroscopy holes that the first surgeon in Hong Kong went through? And the conservative surgeon said, I'm not even sure how that man got into your hip through the holes and through the locations that he has chosen. He was like, quite frankly, it's a miracle that he managed to even get inside your hip. I mean, here's a little photo so you can see the differences between the Australian surgeon and the Hong Kong surgeon. How could that Hong Kong surgeon have f***ed up that badly? Particularly if he is busy saying that he is the world leader in this surgery. What the f***? But anyways, we digress. The surgery went well by all accounts. Because of COVID, there were no visitors allowed, so I was by myself in the hospital for a couple nights, I think. And hospitals just aren't fun at the best of times. I mean, you're interrupted every few hours for medication or for nurses to take your blood pressure. It's just not what I feel is a very conducive environment to rest, let alone adding on the additional stress of not being able to see anyone or having no support system there. So I mean, 2 days, way less time than the 7 days in hospital that I spent in Hong Kong for the same surgery, might I add. After the operation, the Australian surgeon came to me and he said, look, from my perspective, that went as well as it could have, although you should know that we found some irreversible damage. Irreversible damage? He said, yes, we found some rather unsavory outcomes from the first surgery that you had in Hong Kong. He said that he found copious amounts of scar tissue in and around my joint, which was probably causing a lot of the pain that I was experiencing. He also said he found a stitch from the first surgery floating around in my joint. That means that the Hong Kong surgeon did not appropriately secure the stitch. It got loose and it was causing arthritis in my joint. The stitch took out a chunk of my femoral head. So I had incredibly bad arthritis in this joint now as a result of the first surgery. So not only did I have a labrum and incredible pain from that being inappropriately fixed and being damaged, but I also had additional issues because this Hong Kong surgeon f***ed up so badly. But after that second surgery, I had to wait a month for my next operation. I had to give my hip a month to heal from that labrum reconstruction. In that time, I wasn't able to flex my hip. There's some funny photos of my mom shaving my legs because I couldn't bend down to reach. Now, if you remember, this is going on in the middle of COVID. So we had a month to wait by ourselves in lockdown in Melbourne, and then just something horrible happened. My mum and I are alone in Melbourne, no support system, just us in lockdown, and then we get the call that my surgery has been cancelled. They were closing all elective surgeries at this time. We're obviously highly stressed because we have flights going back to Hong Kong. We have to do quarantine in Hong Kong as well upon return home. I don't want the outcome of the first surgery to be jeopardized because of the delay to the second surgery. And we just had to wait with no idea when we were going home or what would be happening. Thankfully, we were taken care of by the most amazing team at that surgeon's office, and they did everything they could to reschedule us as soon as possible. So I think it was actually only about 1 week or so later than it was supposed to be. And it was simply because I had had that first operation already. And if I didn't have the second operation, the first one, it could have been a waste. So my third surgery was a PAO, a periacetabular osteotomy. I've got some x-rays and stuff here to show you what they actually did in the joint, but it was crazy. I mean, in very layman's terms, they cut off my hip socket and reoriented it forward so that it wouldn't be retroverted and so that I would have more room in the actual joint. So hopefully there wouldn't be any continued impingement feelings, and alongside with my new labrum, hopefully everything would be moving well. I was in the hospital for a week at that time because it was a much bigger surgery. I had nurses like the whole month before cringing for me over the fact that I was having a PAO. They were like, it is brutal. It was by far the worst. I was in hospital for a week by myself. Again, like I said, hospitals I don't feel are very conducive to rest. You're being interrupted all the time for sleep. So I must have the operation on a Monday or something. On the Wednesday, I was in tears like all day. I was so tired and I was like, I just want to go home. It was really horrible. I was just tired and felt defeated, and it was an incredibly challenging process. Like I said, recovery was painful, but wow, there were some funny moments that you just have to look back on and smile, because otherwise you just cry. Like I was sitting on the toilet and you have like a raised toilet seat. I remember sitting down, I like lost my crutch and then the toilet paper went, and I was just like sitting on the toilet, crying, and mum came in, and of course, being the lovely mother that she is, taking care of me, she had to get a photo first. Was this a challenging one to recover from. Another really interesting thing is that you can see the scar from this PAO, and I asked him, because I had done a little bit of like Googling to see what the scar would look like. I'm just interested, and I saw so many photos of the scar going from like the hip all the way down the thigh, and I asked him, would he be doing that? And they were like, no, we were doing that about 20 years ago. And I was like, what? They've been doing this practice and this operation for hip retroversion for over 20 years, and none of the Hong Kong surgeons that I saw even recognized it on an x-ray. And so I had 5 screws put in my hip from that PAO. And I've got a little video here, but you could like run your hand over the screws after it was more healed, of course, and they would stick through the skin. So if you like accidentally bang your hip on something, I could feel the screws and I was like, ugh. Anyway, guys, I think I'm gonna leave it there. There is one more part to this video. I have one more surgery to talk about, but I'm gonna leave this one here, talking about 2 and 3. I'm sure there's a lot of details that I forgot, but again, like I said in the first video, I just want this as a record for me so I can have everything in one place, and if it helps out any of you guys. If you have any questions, let me know down below. If not, I hope you guys have a wicked week ahead, and I will see you all next time. Bye, guys.